evening. Welcome to Nitzutzos, Parasha Sparks and Tidbits of Torah interpretations on the weekly Torah portion. This week is Vayishlach, which continues the saga of Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau. Yaakov, who has fled his home because of the fact that Esau was planning to kill him because he had appropriated the blessings, travels to his uncle Lavan, eventually marries his two daughters, Rachel and Leah, establishes the 12 tribes, and then he returns to the land of Canaan. And this is where the Torah picks up, in this week's Torah portion. Yaakov is returning, but he doesn't know how his brother Esau is going to deal with him. Has he forgotten? Has he forgiven? So he sends malachim. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim. And Jacob sent malachim. What is the definition of malachim? So the translation is angels. That's Rashi says that here it's referring to actual angels. What else could the word mean? In fact, the word malach does not really mean angel, it means messenger. But angels are messengers of God, so they're called malachim. But it could also refer to human messengers. So perhaps when it talks about Yaakov sending malachim to his brother Esau, it could very well be that he sent messengers to his brother who came back to report that Esau was really not in a very forgiving mode, but he's coming 400 heavily armed men to confront Jacob. How does Rashi know that it's referring to angels? Well, one explanation is that if you just turn the page back, just one page to the end of last week's Torah portion, it clearly says that Yaakov traveled and he was met by angels of God, messengers of God. Obviously, it's referring to the celestial angels. And since right after that it says, and Jacob sent angels, malachim, messengers, it refers to the same messengers that the Torah spoke about right before this. The Rebbe gives a very simple halachic, legal answer that fits into the simple understanding of the text. And it's something that is simple because Rashi is devoted to giving us the simple, straightforward interpretation of the Torah. So when the Torah says, let's read what we just was referring to. Yaakov sends malachim to his brother Esau, and he tells them to speak to Esau. The Torah goes on to say what he should say to him, that this is what your servant Jacob have said. I lived with Lavan, and I have acquired oxen and donkeys and so on and so forth. And they come back to give the report. Had Yaakov sent human angels, he would have been endangering them. And there's a law, and it's not just a law, but it's based on common sense, that if you send someone in a place of danger and some mishap occurs, you are held responsible. You are guilty for causing that person to suffer this mishap. So if Jacob is sending malachim, it couldn't possibly mean human angels, human messengers rather, because that would have endangered them, and Yaakov certainly would not have done that. We know later on that Yaakov sent his son Joseph, to see his brothers, so he didn't suspect foul play, and of course that's what happened. They sold him, and Yaakov lost his son Yosef for 22 years as a result of sending him on a mission that involved great danger. Little did Yaakov know the danger, but we see from there that when there's great danger, Yaakov regretted it. So here also, Yaakov could not have sent humans because he would have been endangering them. And therefore, if you have command of angels, he was going to send the angels. So he sends these messengers. these heavenly messengers, and this is what Yaakov tells them to say to Esav. In Lavan Garti, I have sojourned with Lavan, I've lived with Lavan, and I have lingered until now. So Rashi says that the word for I have lived, of sojourned, is Garti. Now what does the word Garti mean? Lived. But it also has another meaning, a little bit of a deeper meaning. Rashi, one of his interpretations, adds, the word Garti is the same numerical value as Taryag, which is 613. There were 613 mitzvahs. So Yaakov was telling his brother, don't think I'm vulnerable, because even though I spent so many years with a man like Lavan, who's very much like you, materialistic, coarse, deceptive, and someone who you have to reckon with, so you can't do whatever you think you want to do, you would think then that if I lived with him, I had abandoned my spiritual journey and have become something like Lavan and Esav, and therefore I would be vulnerable. No, I kept all the 613 commandments, and I did not learn from his evil ways. Therefore I have special power, special spiritual merit that will stand me in good stead, and I'm not afraid of you. Now the question is obvious. What do you mean that he kept the 613? Is that an expression that I did everything right? Why 613? There were no 613 commandments. There were only 7 commandments given to Noah and his descendants. So where does the 613 come from? And the answer is, based on the statement in the Talmud, that the patriarchs anticipated the commandments of the Torah. They studied Torah, they knew the Torah, and they actually observed all of the 613 commandments. Now, one could ask a very simple question. There are certain commandments that there's no way they could have possibly observed. And the proof of that is Yaakov himself, who just read in last week's Torah portion, married 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. And one of the 613 commandments is that we're not allowed to marry 2 sisters. So how could he say, I observed all the 613 commandments? And the Rebbe answers that it doesn't say I fulfilled, I did all 613. It says I guarded them, I did not violate them. Jacob marrying 2 sisters was not a violation of the law, because he was obligated to marry them. Once he had been fooled into marrying Leah, he had no choice, but he had to marry Rachel because he had made a solemn promise to her that he would marry her. And breaching that promise would be a violation of one of the fundamental laws that applied even then. So he had no right to observe a commandment that had not yet been given formally, because that was not yet his obligation. That was voluntarily performed. And that cannot override an obligation that you have that is based on a commandment. Therefore, he was permitted to marry 2 sisters. But in effect, since he was permitted, it was not a violation of the 613. The same thing would be true if a person, in order to save a life, does something on Shabbos ordinarily not permitted. That is not considered as if the person had violated the Shabbos. They had not violated, because the Torah itself permits breaking the Shabbos to save a life. And there are many other similar examples. But what is Yaakov's main objective is to tell his brother Esav that in spite of the fact that I lived in exile, I did not change. And that's the lesson for us, that the challenge that God had given us in exile is that no matter how far from our center we journey, no matter in which environment we live, we never forget who we are and what are our obligations. And he goes on to say, as if almost to brag, Vayihi li shor v'chamor, and I acquired oxen, donkeys, flocks, servants, maidservants. He's bragging about what he has acquired. Why is he bragging about that? So Rashi gives a simple explanation. He says, what are you angry about? I got the blessings. What were the blessings? Dew of the heaven and the fat of the earth. I didn't get that. I didn't get any real estate. I didn't get any earth, any farmland. I got movables, cattle, livestock, servants. So the blessing actually did not come true, and therefore there's no reason to be angry. The deeper understanding of this is that the word for donkey over here, and other words can also be interpreted similar ways, the Midrash tells us refers to Mashiach. The Mashiach, says in the Torah, will be coming riding on a donkey. So the word donkey is sometimes understood as a hint, as an allusion to Mashiach. So he's telling him that he has never lost his faith in Mashiach, that ultimately the world will become a good world, a perfect world, and even you, Esav, will have been rehabilitated. So he's hinting to him that in spite of Esav's anger, in spite of his hostility, in spite of his evil, a day will come that he will also be rehabilitated. Now the focus on the word chamor, donkey, even though there are two scenarios for Mashiach. The Talmud says that if we merit, Mashiach will come, in the words of the book of Daniel, riding on a cloud in a majestic, supernatural way. If we're not meritorious, if we don't deserve it and earn it, Mashiach will come in a more subdued way, like a poor man riding on a donkey. So what Yaakov is trying to say sounds strange, because he should have said or hinted that Mashiach will come on a cloud. Why focus that Mashiach is coming on a donkey? So one explanation is that the word donkey, chamor in Hebrew, also means materialism. Something that is coarse, materialistic, something that is in a way resistant to anything spiritual, anything subtle and refined. That's what we mean by chamor. Riding on a donkey, which is what Mashiach will be doing, means he's in control of that materialistic bent. He's in control of that hedonistic passion and all the other animalistic tendencies. And that's what Yaakov is trying to tell Esav, that you, Esav, you represent the materialistic pursuits of this world. Mashiach will come and he will ride on you. He will subdue that, and he will elevate even the materialistic aspects of Esav. Then the Torah talks about how Yaakov delivers this elaborate gift to Esav, and when Esav meets him, in spite of the fact that he was planning to attack him, he had 400 armed men, but in spite of that, Esav and Yaakov embrace, and they kiss. As the Torah puts it, in chapter 33, verse 4, Esav ran toward him, embraced him, fell upon his neck and kissed him. Then they wept. And Rashi, interestingly, tells us what was going on over here. So Rashi says that this kissing, if you look in the Torah, which has no vowels, no punctuation marks, nothing, just letters, nevertheless has dots on the words Vayishlach, and he kissed him. Whenever there are dots on a word, the dots are there to qualify the word. That it's not exactly what the word implies. And Rashi says there's a dispute amongst our sages. Some say this means that his kiss was not sincere. That even when he was embracing and kissing him, it lacks sincerity. And it quotes from Shimon ben Yochai, the famous Talmudic sage, the author of the mystical work, the Zohar. And he says, Halachahi, there's a law. B'yadua, it is well known, she'esav son el Yaakov, that Esav hates Jacob. It's a law. It's something that is not going to change. It's etched in stone, as we say, that Esav and Yaakov are bitter enemies. Not until the days of Mashiach, when Esav will be rehabilitated, will that change. So then what's the meaning of that he kissed him? He says, it was a momentary, fleeting emotion. Somehow Esav lost control of his own feelings, and his compassion was able to overcome that hatred, and he did kiss him with all his heart. So Rashi has two opinions here. One that qualifies the hatred and says that the kissing rather, and says that he didn't kiss him sincerely, and the other opinion of Shimon bar Yochai qualifies it by saying he didn't stop hating him except for that moment. There's an interesting comment believed by Rav Meir Shapiro or Rav Menachem Zemba, I'm not sure, one of the two of the greatest Polish rabbis before the Holocaust. But they focus on the words halachahi, it is a law. If Shimon bar Yochai is trying to say that it's a well-known fact, the word for that is not halacha, law. And they explain that the word halacha is used sometimes in the Talmud to describe something that was handed down from God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Don't ask questions about it. This is what God said. It's not rational. It's supra-rational. It's above logic. It's not subject to rational analysis and explanation. When you look at the hatred of Esav to Yaakov, Esav here metaphorically refers to the anti-Semites of the world, and you see their hatred to Yaakov, you realize that it's not rational. People try to deal with anti-Semitism rationally and making a mistake, because if it was rational, you could argue, but if it's not rational, you can't argue. And how do we know it's not rational? All we have to do is look at the arguments. Jews are so rich, Jews are downtrodden, and therefore they're despised. Jews are always interested in the affairs of others. They want to control everything. Jews keep to themselves. They don't care about anyone else. They don't have anything to do with the rest of the world. Just bring all the anti-Semites in one room and you'll see how they'll cancel each other. They'll contradict each other. So what's the reason for anti-Semitism? Why does anti-Semitism come from the right, from the left, from the center, from all ethnic groups? And it cannot be attributed to one or any real reason. And the answer is halachahi. It's a law. It's something that doesn't have to make sense. It's an irrational hatred. And taking that point and going beyond that, so how do you fight irrationality? You can fight rationality with a better argument, but you can't fight irrationality with a better argument, because it's not based on argument. And the answer is, as the Rebbe would always say, that you fight one negative trait with its counterpart in the spiritual realm. If the negative trait is misguided love, then you fight it with a proper love. If it's misguided judgment, then proper judgment. Everything has to be countered with its parallel. What is the parallel of irrationality? The parallel to that is doing things going beyond rationality, not limiting your devotion to God and to the commitment to Torah and mitzvahs to your understanding, but always going beyond your understanding. Backing up a little, before Yaakov gets to his brother Esav, Yaakov goes back and he's left alone. Where did he go? Rashi says he forgot some small jugs and he went back to get it. Talmud says something very surprising. But from here we see that the righteous people care more for their money than they care for themselves. This sounds almost like an anti-Semitic canard, that Jews are obsessed with their money. And here it's saying the righteous people care for their money. But the truth of the matter is, what it really means here is two things on two levels. On the simple level, it means they are so careful about theft that they don't say, well, it's only a few cents, only a few dollars, what's the big difference if I take something that's not mine, the person doesn't care. You can find all sorts of justifications But righteous people are very meticulous about everything. They make sure they know exactly what's theirs and what's not theirs. And therefore they're very possessive of what they have, because they know that everything they have is kosher money. It's something that they gained and earned legally, and not, God forbid, the other way. But on a deeper level, the purpose of being in this world, Hasidic thought explains, is for us to refine the world. So God gave us a soul, which is the energy, the light that refines the physical body. But God didn't put the soul only in a body. He gave the body an extended body, which is what we call our possessions, our property, our extensions of ourselves. The ultimate goal is not just to refine your own physical body, but also the surrounding area, that which God put in your possession. So here, if you have a few jugs, any other person, especially if he's rich, will say, I'm not going to waste my time to go back to retrieve a few jugs worth a few cents, a few dollars. A man who's worth millions or billions is not going to worry about losing a few dollars. But when you're dealing with a righteous person, he knows that everything that he owns has a purpose, and he's not willing to forgo bringing that object into the sphere of his influence. But what happens over here, now that he's alone, he has this wrestling match until dawn. Who is this opponent? Who's his adversary? We're told that this is none other than an angel. But it was not just any angel, it was the angel of Esav, as Rashi quotes the Midrash. It was Esav's guardian angel, who's now taking up for his master and trying to destroy Jacob. And they wrestle all night, and he can't do anything. He cannot prevail over Jacob, so he strikes him in his thigh, which caused him to limp. And he begs now that it's morning, he begs Jacob to be able to leave. And Jacob says, no, I won't let you go until you bless me. And he says, what is your name? My name is Yaakov, Jacob. No, Jacob is no longer your name. Your name will be Israel. Why? Because you have struggled with an angel and with people, and you have prevailed. So this translation has it, for you have striven with the divine and with man and have overcome. The word Israel comes from a root that means sar, you're in control, you're a minister, you're a master of your circumstances. Yaakov, on the other hand, comes from the word akev, heel, something that is below others. Israel is something that is above and beyond others and controls them. So you're no longer just a akev, a heel, a follower, subordinate. You are a master. And later on in the Torah, we find that God himself confirms this blessing, and God himself also calls Jacob by his new name, Israel. But there's a difference. When Jacob is blessed by the angel, he says, your name is no longer is Yaakov. He completely eradicates the name Yaakov. But when God, as we read later on in the Parsha, God, when he reiterates that blessing, then he tells him clearly, he starts by saying, your name is Jacob. And then he goes on to say, your name is not just Jacob, but also be Israel. But he confirms the fact that his name was not omitted or deleted the way it was with Abraham. Abraham was originally Abram, without the hey, and his name was changed to Avraham. And we're not allowed to refer to Abraham as Abraham, because that's demeaning of his stature. Avram means he's the father of the Arameans. Avraham means he's the father of a multitude of nations. Once a person becomes a father of a multitude, we no longer want to denigrate him by saying he's only the father of the Arameans. But when Yaakov turns into Israel, the name Yaakov remains, at least the way God blesses Jacob. But the way the angel of Esau blesses him, he says, no, your name is no longer Jacob. Why? Why did he want to change his name completely and eradicate the old name? You would think that God would want to eradicate the old name, because the old name has this negative connotation of you're only a heel, you're a subordinate, you're subservient, you're lowly, whereas Israel, you're a master, you're in control, something sublime. Why would the angel say, no, you're no longer a Jacob, and God says, no, your name is still Jacob, we're not going to get rid of that name. In fact, throughout the Torah, Jacob is used more often than the name Israel for the same person. One way of explaining it is that Yaakov and Israel are not just names of one person, they are names of two different states of the Jewish people. When they are in exile, they are Yaakovs, they are subordinate, they are subjugated, they are oppressed. But when they are in their own land, with the Beis Hamikdash, totally free, no master, especially in the Messianic age, then they are Israel. So the angel was very clever, and he said, your name is no longer Jacob, which means you're no longer going to be able to retain your identity when you are in a time of exile. Yes, when you have your temple, you have your prophets, you have all the spiritual assets, you're Israel, you're in control. But once you're driven into exile, that's it. You're no longer in control of exile situations. God says, no, that's not the way it's going to be. The Jewish people are a unique people. Even when they are in exile, they are Yaakov, they are still a godly people, because the word Yaakov is a composite of two parts. Yud, the letter Yud, which represents God's existence. The Yud is the smallest letter of the alphabet. It's said to correspond to the highest divine attribute of Chachma, of divine wisdom. And the next part of the word is Akev, the heel. Yaakov is someone who can bring divine energy even in the lowest part of the body, which means in the lowest state that a human being, a Jewish person, could be in, which is a state of Golus, a state of exile. And therefore, God says, your name is going to remain Yaakov. Yes, Yisrael is the new name. You could anticipate you will have redemption. You will be masters. You will no longer be in exile. But even in those last moments of exile, you have to remember that Yaakov is someone who can still bring godliness into the state of exile in which he finds himself. One other thought. Later on, we read as Yaakov returns and he sets up shop in Shechem, and the mayor of Shechem, whose name was Chamor, donkey, because he was a materialistic human being, and he has a son, Shechem, who forcefully takes Yaakov's daughter Dinah and defiles her and violates her. When her brothers, Shimon and Levi, discover this, they plan this ruse. They have all the people circumcise themselves as a way of getting the two groups of people to intermarry and bring their businesses together, make the place a flourishing economic oasis. And now that they're ailing, on the third day after circumcision, Shimon and Levi take their swords and wipe out all the men in the city. And when Yaakov finds out about this, his response to them was that you caused me to be embarrassed amongst all the dwellers of the land, and we are vulnerable, we could be annihilated. And they respond, should he treat our sister like a harlot? And that's the end of the story. Jacob doesn't pursue this any further. He doesn't counter-argue. What was going on over here? Shimon and Levi felt that these people were deserving of the death penalty. The Rambam explains that Noahites, or the descendants of Noah, are obligated to observe 7 commandments. There are 6 commandments, including not to worship other gods, not to be blasphemous towards God, not to steal, not to kill, not to commit sexual crimes, not to eat an animal before killing it. And the 7th commandment is to establish courts to enforce those laws. If you don't enforce those laws, you have created a state of anarchy, you are destroying the world, and the punishment for that would be the death penalty. Not so much as a punishment, but as a recognition of what the sin accomplishes. The sin brings destruction to the world. You cannot have a lawless society because everyone will suffer. It'll bring destruction and wreak havoc on everyone. So they felt that the people of Shechem stood by and did not in any way try to stop their mayor and their mayor's son from committing this heinous crime. They were deserving of the death penalty. Nachmanides disagrees with Rambam and he says no, they were killed probably because they had many other sins that they violated and they were deserving of the death penalty. But there's an interesting caveat to all this. Shimon and Levi are described here as Ish, which is a word for an adult man. And if you make the calculations, Levi, the younger of the two brothers, was just 13 years old. And this, in fact, is one of the biblical sources for the age of bar mitzvah. A bar mitzvah is when a boy becomes 13, is based, according to one opinion, on this parsha, this section of the Torah, which describes them as ish, as adult men, even though one of them was only 13. From there we see that 13 years old is the age of maturity when a boy becomes a man. Now, isn't this interesting? This is what the two bar mitzvah boys, or the one bar mitzvah boy, does on the day of his bar mitzvah. He turns 13, and he goes out and wipes out a whole city, commits mass murder. This doesn't sound to be the perfect example for a bar mitzvah. And yet, if the fact that the Torah alludes to bar mitzvah in this section means that there's a lesson, a positive lesson, that is embedded in the negative. Whether or not they did the right thing, that's a subject that deserves a lot more discussion. Why is Jacob only telling him, you're embarrassing me, instead of saying you're bloodthirsty murderers? That's a separate discussion for another time. But what is the positive message in all this? So the Rebbe, whose ability to find the positive even in the most negative, says, what is the definition of a bar mitzvah? Someone who has reached maturity. He's now a bar das. He now has das. Das means knowledge. He has an ability to know the difference between right and wrong. And he is someone who's in possession of logical properties. He's able to reason and do things and responsible for his actions. A girl, a year earlier actually, at the age of 12. But he says, no, that's not the extent of a bar mitzvah, just to have knowledge. The bar mitzvah has to also be prepared to go to extremes to do what is right. Just like Shimon and Levi went to extremes because they could not tolerate the violation of their sister. They could not tolerate the compromising of the sanctity and the purity of their lives. And therefore they went to the lengths, that they went to the extremes, going beyond their das, their understanding. And that's what a bar mitzvah boy has to know, and a bar mitzvah girl has to know, that Judaism is not just based on logic, although there's plenty of logic and rational thought. It means a Jew has to be prepared to go to extremes to uphold Judaism and Jewish values. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos and a blessed week.